Chief Futurist at Futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, and author of Facing Our Futures, Nikolas Badminton, joining us on Canada Now. And this week we discuss how climate change will affect transportation. But, before we get into that, how transportation affects the climate. Once upon a time, the way we traveled didn't have much of an impact on the Earth's climate. And then, of course, we began burning fossil fuels.
Well, of course, yeah, and a huge amount of pollution, obviously from flying aircraft, heavy, larger shipping, and whatever is sort of responsible for a huge amount of the pollution that actually happens in the world, Jeff. So we shouldn't be surprised here. All of these industries are kind of feel angry that they're being sort of fingered out and pointed at, and you're a problem, or flight shaming or whatever. It's like, well, there is a big problem there, and we need to start making some changes. Absolutely.
According to NASA, transportation now generates about a fourth of global carbon dioxide emissions, second only to the electric power sector. Now, how climate change will affect transportation. First off, flights will get bumpier due to our changing atmosphere, more jet streams for aviators to avoid.
Yeah, we've all been on planes when it gets bumpy, right?
Yeah.
And it's not always. I've been on a plane when it's been hit by lightning, Jeff.
Really? What happened?
Yeah. It kind of dropped suddenly. All the lights went out, and then everything was fine afterwards. The crowd on board were hysterical. These are sort of folks from the UK that go on vacation once a year to some dodgy Spanish island. I think it was Lanzarote I was going to, or something like that. Anyway, it was quite hilarious, and the sort of the pilot was chuckling as he was walking through the.
Really?
He's just trying to make everyone feel better. Anyway,
okay.
But yeah, we are going to have bumpier times. This is going to happen. Jet streams. They're sort of saying, "Oh, are they adjusting?" Some of the major jet streams in the world. How that's going to affect things. Flight times could be affected, and general comfort on these flights. I personally hate turbulence, Jeff. So,
of course, I don't like it. I would have been one of those passengers on a plane if it had been struck by lightning. I would have freaked out myself. That would have been, because I don't vacate a lot. I don't vacation a lot. So that would have been me. So more turbulence could mean more loss of life in its most serious,
of course,
situation. Injuries, damage to aircraft, flight delays, and so on. Not to mention the financial cost to airlines that will impact all of that. And who do you think is going to be on the hook for that?
Huh? The other day I was looking at prices to fly my family to the UK at Christmas, and for laughs, I said that we were going to travel business class, Jeff.
Yeah.
And right now it's 38,000 Canadian dollars to fly to the UK.
What?
Business class for myself, my partner, and our 2.5-year-old son.
Really?
Yeah, we don't fly business. It's
38,000. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. I've worked in airlines. There's a whole strange bunch of mathematics around who gets taxed for what. But this is going to be everyone on the plane is going to get taxed for that. Metaphorically taxed for that cost that's going to be passed down the line.
Oh my goodness! Bumpy flights without the presence of cloudiness or thunderstorms. That's what's called clear air turbulence, and that's expected to double in frequency by 2050. The average strength of turbulence is expected to increase by 10 to 40%. So it's going to happen more often, and it's going to be worse.
Yeah, why are we surprised? We do something in the world, and the world's just going to get more difficult to live in, right, Jeff? Fewer people are going to be flying and going places. Hybrid work hasn't necessarily gone away.
Yeah. Severe turbulence at typical airline cruising altitudes could become 2 to 3 times more common. So as NASA says, and I'm going to read this part here from NASA, climate change can also make it harder for aircraft to take off. As temperatures rise, air becomes less dense, so planes have a harder time generating the lift they need to become airborne. Because of this, some aircraft runways may not be long enough for certain planes to take off. It also might force aircraft operators to reduce the takeoff weight of planes and helicopters.
Yeah, and you know, we might be pointing our finger at the Middle East or these places that are, are very, very hot. But this happens in fairly temperate places as well. So in 2017, in Phoenix, Arizona, I remember this, temperatures nearly reached 120 degrees. They had to cancel more than 60 flights because the safety calculations weren't calibrated for temperatures that high.
Oh my
Right. So but in 2018, in the UK at London City Airport, God, it's never that hot.
You get such a big kick out of when it's stuff out of the UK. When it's
95.5 degrees, 95.5 degrees, London City Airport in the UK. It meant that some flights were too heavy to take off on its short runways, as you say, and they had to remove some passengers before the planes could lift off. Thinner air and hotter air. And, I actually think we're going to get summers where you're going to have places like Saudi Arabia or whatever. There's not going to be any flights leaving or landing, right? I think it's going to be very, very interesting in those places. That's where I think the Hyperloop and other things are going to sort of start to kick in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Other modes of transportation. Let's look at the continuing decline of Arctic sea ice. From land to what shouldn't be water. On one hand, ships can sail across the Arctic Ocean with way more ease, and this will increase Arctic shipping. But on the other hand, more shipping activity will, yes, you guessed it, increase pollution and oil spills. Ships will also be entering uncharted waters, encountering plenty of ice along the way. U.S. and Canadian Coast Guards, Nick, could get a lot busier.
There's a lot of innovation work happening with solar sails and actually using like wind powered like the large tankers as well, thinking about hydrogen, what can be done from that perspective, thinking about nuclear for these kinds of engines as well. It feels in some cases it sort of shifts the problem a little bit. But yeah, I mean, we've got a heavy energy and a heavy transportation problem in the world, and we're sort of starting to see that play out. And the melting sea ice is going to be a bigger problem than people are even starting to really understand today.
Well, we might see more droughts and floods, and they could be more intense. This, of course, would impact boats shipping cargo as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So crazy. I flew from Las Vegas to St. John's, Newfoundland. I am obviously responsible for carbon emissions. But as we were flying over Nebraska, I noticed that the Platte River was completely dry. And at the same time, over in Europe, you had the Rhine, which is a major artery of transportation of goods across Europe. And that was at such low levels that some things called hunger stones were revealed. And in Europe, hunger stones were laid there as far back as 1616 by people during droughts to say, if you see this, weep, is one of the inscriptions on one of these stones. And I've used that in keynotes. And it's kind of like, we've had things happen like this over time and over history, but we're going to see this happen a lot. I mean, we've got a big problem. Europe's going to have some really big problems. It's had a really bad ski season this year in many places in Europe. And there's, the water that you would expect from snow is supposed to be there, right? So, yeah, continuing problems every single year. This article that you sent me, you could publish this every year for the next 100 years and it's still going to be relevant. You just need to make the numbers a little bit worse every year.
Yeah, that's the trend we're going. And Chief Futurist at Futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, and author of Facing Our Futures, Nikolas Badminton. Appreciate it, pal. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. As always, it's fantastic to chat to you about such heavy matters of interest.
Great way to end the weekend, to go into a long weekend. Thanks, pal. Appreciate it.